You
Just a few seconds left here, 7, 6 left. Firebird goes for the kill, he's going to pick it up. If Just Access survives, he's going to win the round, there's no time. Oh my God, Firebird, are you kidding me? Because of it, Firebird is going to be winning.
Hello everyone and welcome to another weekly edition of By the Numbers CSGO, of course. I'm your host Richard Lewis, and with me, as he is always every week, it is of course the world's leading CSGO analyst. It is Duncan Thorin Shields. Just to say right off the bat, it's going to be a slightly shorter show than usual because Duncan's a little bit tired. Now, why is that, mate?
Just out socialising as I want to do, Rich. Seeing people. Seeing League of Legends players, so it wouldn't be that interesting to see who, you know. People in CSGO wouldn't care.
Would it not?
Oh,
so, okay.
Just some people from the Renegades League of Legends team, but again, not the Renegades CSGO team. They're in America doing their level best to get past like tier 3 NA teams, but God bless them. God bless them, you know.
Well, let's get into that, actually. It's a good place to start the show. There was obviously I didn't even think it was that embarrassing. The iBUYPOWER Cup happened, and obviously I do another show called Trash Talk. Moses called into that. We had a nice long conversation.
I see how it is. You're having conversations with Moses now on other shows that you just got it in through the veneer of like, he just called up randomly, to that show. I've got some other analysts on other shows. Yeah, okay, I see how it is.
Yeah. It's every man for himself. It's CSGO.
He can already work for ESL, you know.
Well, anyway, so he called in. Obviously, we don't control the phone-ins, and it's Moses, so we're going to let him through. Rigorous call screening. We had a long talk about the iBUYPOWER Cup, and one of the things that came out of that, we were talking about very briefly about Renegades, and I got to say, Renegades went there. It wasn't particularly great, the outcome for them. And one of the things that sort of came off the back of that was Sponge, a player that I love Chad, good friends with him, known him a long time. He gave this impassioned speech about how people shouldn't write them off, and there was people in the press that were saying they weren't a threat and trying to imply that they were garbage, and he was saying, well, what they were saying was garbage. And then, of course, he went and played Luminosity, and their team got 16-0 defeated. So, an embarrassing moment, and I just wanted to, my heart actually goes out to him. I just wanted to ask your opinion, first of all, on this. Is that one of the... do you think we should look at that as something embarrassing?
I mean, it's got to be embarrassing. You lost by literally the largest disparity you can have in a regulation game. Right after you hubristically said, people suggested we aren't a threat and that we might be trash. And then you literally just get bombed the fuck out of the tournament. Well, you didn't actually on that map. It was they had to play CLG again. They lost that. But that certainly helped them along their way, put it that way. Put it this way, if CLG delivered the bombing, Luminosity took their pants down and put handcuffs around their legs.
But but here's the thing. I thought maybe you could identify with this because you've made bold statements, bold predictions in the past, and obviously it's what we kind of have to do. You can't just play everything by the numbers all the time. You have to go out on a limb now and then. You have to speak from the heart. Try and leverage gut feelings and match it up with statistical analysis. And I imagine sometimes...
Don't do that about Poland, though, Rich. That's what I've learned. Don't leverage gut feelings and statistical analysis with Poland, though. Just keep it off Poland, okay? Keep it in the West, like I wanted them to do with those ESL events.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely going to do that. But the point is, being a bold character who's gone out and said things, and then you've been proven, wrong on rare occasions, I will add.
Yeah, sure.
Can you perhaps empathise?
I mean, the problem I thought I saw with that is I'm not really sure that in the first place there was kind of that much hate against Renegades. I think most people, as far as I can tell, in terms of bearing in mind, the people he was kind of lashing out at initially was like casters and presumably people like us. As far as I can tell, no one really went super hard on Renegades. In fact, everyone was kind of they're all right, but they have had like a slump in form and they have been having problems. And obviously at the moment, I mean, you've got to be real. I don't think they really are a threat in the context he's talking about. So he might be a little bit delusional there. But I mean, I can understand some of the situation there, some of the issues that might be going on. It's actually something where after that situation, I've decided I'm going to make one of my Thorin Thoughts videos in the future about Renegades. So I'm doing my research. I'm going to watch the games. I'm going to try and give like a reasonable assessment of what the good parts are and what the problems are. Because I think they clearly have problems in their team. If you look at how many bad results they've had over the year, it outweighs the few times they had good results. And even in this tournament, what made him buoyed up to say that comment was that they'd just beaten CLG. Well, actually, if you look at it, one of the interesting things is CLG is one of the few Western teams who are like decent, who actually lose to Renegades regularly, bizarrely. They've lost at a bunch of tournaments. They lost at the IEM Gamescom. They lost at ESWC. So I think bizarrely they just have like a weird good matchup against that one team, unfortunately. So he probably initially picked a good point in time to make a statement like that. But then, I mean, I think he was a bit bold thinking he was going to beat Luminosity next. And then obviously got super trashed. You can't have known it'd go that badly, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the worst thing. Like, you know, if you lose even 16-6, 16-8, I think everyone except Luminosity are in a good place right now. You know, Luminosity are playing particularly well. But obviously, to get blown out, 16-0 is just horrible at any time. And, you know, you think about when it happened to Virtus.Pro out in Valencia. Even a team with their achievements were getting called into question by the community. And obviously, for a team like Renegades, those questions are only going to be asked at a louder volume. Now, my question to you...
Put it this way, if Sponge and Renegades were trying to star in a modern remake of the 1981 Brian De Palma classic Blowout, this would be not only a much less interesting version of the movie, but also wouldn't require a 90-minute project to decipher why they got completely wrecked.
And let
reference
me just say,
game incredibly on point.
Yeah, your reference game is absolutely on point. We're rolling it
Literally,
back another decade.
Before I was even born, this one.
Yeah. This is the thing, though. Like, I think if we keep pushing our references further and further back, eventually we'll get to one so arcane and obscure, not even Sir Scoots himself will get them. And we have to go right back to the American Civil
what's
War.
wrong, guys? Didn't you know about that unfinished sonnet of Shakespeare?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a stone wall, that defense, just like my good friend Stonewall Jackson, etc., etc. Anyway, so the question I was going to ask you before we reference Brian De Palma was, has the Renegades have obviously moved out to Las Vegas. There's been a significant investment in the team. And, I think it's a great story. It's almost a fairy tale story, almost, because we have these laborers, plumbers, good, honest, hardworking men from Oz who were playing effectively at they could only really commit to a semi-amateur level or a semi-professional level. They were going to events and, they were putting in decent performances, but it was all tempered by the fact that these guys weren't fully committed. Then they get their big opportunity. They join Renegades. They get moved out to NA. They have their salaries. They have everything they want. And yet the only thing that's eluded them so far is the results. That's why it can't truly be called a fairy tale story. So my question to you at this juncture would be, how much more time do we give Renegades? It's not a question I want to ask. I feel bad about it, asking it, because obviously they are my friends, but bias cannot enter the pontifications of the journalistic mind. So how much longer do we give them before we say, okay, that they are actually going to live up to their billing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problem with Renegades is obviously before they were these plucky up-and-comers from Australia. They were in Vox, they had the cool result at Gfinity, but then they did get to join Renegades, like a proper org, started getting paid all this sick Alphadraft Skrilla. They've got this obsession with Skrilla, Rich, much like I did. Then next thing you know, they were wearing those Renegades gear. They were dressed to kill. They thought to themselves, like, we're the untouchables at this point in time. But you know what, Rich? If they carry on like that, they're going to end up as casualties of war. Again, reference gear, incredibly on point.
The thing is, no one's going to appreciate just how clever that was. But I do.
Also, that's actually the kind of point I want to make as well. I do actually think, in a weird way, getting signed to a proper org and now moving to NA, etc. First of all, it's removed some of the excuses, and I think it also has made them think like, that they're a bit better than they are. Like, I think they kind of look back. I don't think they entirely think the Gfinity result was like totally legit. Like, I think they must know that they caught people off by surprise a little bit. But I think, as you can see by the outrage with like the sponge thing, I think they do think they're a bit better than they are. Whereas if you look at their results, like, put it so it'd be hard to make a case for them as a top 10 team.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that this is where the speculation is now coming in. Do we need to break up the Australian hegemony within the team? Do we need to introduce some North Americans who would relish the opportunity to play with some of these more skilled Australians? Do we need to send some of the other chaps back down under? And again, not my question, not my line of thinking. But certainly some people have asked the question on forums and on the internet and on Twitter.
I would think that would be the most obvious fix. Like, from looking at the team, again, I haven't watched all the games that I want to watch of their past, etc., to make the super in-depth video I said I was going to do. But from the preliminary ones I can remember, and from the stuff I've been thinking about recently, first of all, I think they could improve their results just by switching around the roles within the current team. Like, I think some of those are a little bit off. But I also think some of them are off because some of their players aren't the players they once were or are in the wrong sorts of roles. So I think if I were them, I would probably look to a roster move, which unfortunately might not be possible, because if you know about the formation of the lineup they have now, they basically made this lineup by taking like all the best players in Australia. And like, for example, the guy Yam, who they have as their AWPer, he was like the carry player of Immunity who was doing really well. So they took him from Immunities, then Immunity was weakened. So they've kind of already tried to make like the super team anyway. So I don't know that there's any talent in Australia. So the problem is, to me, and I mean, I've said this on the show before, one of the reasons they're in Renegades is when I was talking to Monty, the owner of Renegades, about who's available for CSGO, I said to him, look at this Vox Eminor team. And by the way, a side factor that's kind of like hidden value is, since they speak English and you'd move them to NA, you could obviously just get NA players in theory to move into the team and play there. So that's like an aspect other people might not have thought of. So I have to say, I would be looking to that route. If you're already in NA, just maybe look at some players you could give a try to. I mean, I'm not sure exactly who it would be right now, because obviously a lot of the players are in contracts, but I'd at least be open to it. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because they've only just moved to NA, and this lineup in theory are all like buds and whatnot. So just with thinking of the way the org is, I imagine they'll let it sort of play out a little bit, maybe even go into the Turner League and see how they do there. But if I were them, I just being brutally honest, I would probably start to do a roster move already, because I've seen them at enough events with this lineup now. I don't think this one's going to work as it is at the moment.
Well, I mean, obviously, they could still look to Australia. At the Crown Counterstrike Invitational, we saw Immunity have a good run. And sort of spearheading that was the player called Ricky. Now, he's somebody that I think has caught the eye on more than one occasion. Seems to be a good all-rounder, and certainly somebody that could maybe benefit from being in a better team. I mean, so before they look to NA, I mean, is there some sort of... Might they want to mine Immunity again to try and bring another Australian across, presuming they're going to have a bit more chemistry and a bit more understanding about that individual's game?
The big problem I see is kind of the thing I referenced about Yam, which is that basically what Ricky's doing now is like what Yam was doing in Immunity before. He was in Immunity and he was carrying, and everyone's going, right, well, Immunity's not that good, but that Yam guy's really good. If they got him into Vox, they'd be even better. And so the problem is the fact that Vox isn't as good, Yam isn't as good in Renegades as he was in Immunity suggests to me it's more like a systemic issue within how Renegades structured their team. So I don't know that it would necessarily work, because if you bring Ricky over, maybe the same thing happens, because presumably you'd probably have to replace the young guys as they're both AWPers, or run a double AWP setup or something. So if they're not getting the most out of the AWPer they have already, I'm not sure it makes that much sense, even though, yes, on paper, if you don't look at the structure of the team, he's clearly the next best player at the moment in terms of who's playing well.
And just as a final thought about Renegades, after they did drop out of the iBUYPOWER Cup, they did an interview, or again rather Sponge did an interview. That's his particular burden to bear. He is the mouthpiece for the team, very good at it, but of course it does put you in the firing line when things aren't going particularly well. And he said that their main focus, the primary focus of the team, was of course the Turner League. Now, Renegades were one of the first organizations that came out and publicly said, we're totally going to be in the Turner League. We're going to be there. We can't wait. And the players have obviously now been vocal about how they're making that a big focus. Given that we don't even have an exact date yet for the Turner League, and things could be subject to change between now and then, is this not a sort of worrying trend in itself, that the players would be so focused on something that, while we can assume they're going to take part in it, we still don't know exactly when?
It is kind of strange that they are the first team who literally just came out as soon as the league was announced and said, like, we're going to be in this league. Like, it sounded like, I don't know why, but they just did it. Everyone else, as far as I'm aware, to some degree, has still been negotiating, or if they've signed, they haven't revealed publicly and they've kept it all secret. For some reason, they just seem super gung-ho to be into it. I can only presume because it's an American org and they like the idea, like, oh, it's going to be on television in America, and they've a lot, I can see how people fall for that notion if you're Americans, especially because, just to tie it into a great example of the same thing that happened, that's the exact reason I thought why a lot of the Americans went super ham on the CGS thing. Some of the Europeans went in on it, but they went in a bit more cynically. People like Jason Lake went in because they were, part of them you could tell was like, it was like the idea that this would validate all the things they'd done to them. Like, look, guys, I did invest all that money in the business, but look, we're on television and this is a real thing. I get the feeling that's maybe something behind why they're so gung-ho to go into it. Also, let's face it, where it stands right now with the problems their CSGO team's having, if they can get a spot in that league, they probably should take it, because there was going to be 12 teams in the league, wasn't there?
Yeah, well, yeah. Hang on, let me try.
Is it 12 or 10 or what?
It might have been. Am I gangster tripping? It might have been 16.
Well, okay, if it's 16,
yeah, 16,
that might not be as bad.
It's 16. Two groups of 8, I believe.
Okay, maybe that's not as bad then. I was going to say, if it was going to be 12, if I were them, I'd snap the hand off whoever offered you, because I wouldn't put them top 12 in the world at the moment. So in that sense, it would definitely be worth their while. The big issue I see with that is, it sounds like a great plan. Let's just try the Turner League, see how it goes, and if it goes badly, we'll make changes. Yeah, but the Turner League sounds like it lasts ages, and if you start to have problems, you're probably not going to want to wait the entire league, which could be like, let's think how long it is. It's like a fifth of a year almost to play in the league. So if I were them, I don't know. I think there may be just, it is a bit weird that they're so gung-ho to just go straight into that league when everyone else is still waiting to see what's going to happen. Because I still don't even know who any of the other teams are.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing. At the moment, my understanding is with the Turner League, is that it's all very much up in the air as well. There is a negotiating process going on. The initial meeting, I believe, had 13 teams either invited or represented, but by no means were those 13 teams the ones that are guaranteed positions. It was just that those were the 13 teams that people felt needed to be there for it to be a genuine, authentic league. There was 3 spots that were kind of deemed as open for grabs. And obviously, between now and when the league starts, teams have an opportunity to kind of play their way into that, or reach out and approach the Turner and the people who were organizing it. But by the same token, from that initial 13 that were contacted, we know there's going to be a battle for exclusivity rights in 2016. So with that in mind, let's just say ESL elected to run an exclusivity league, and that rumor's been percolating in the background. Now, if that is the case, and there might be some teams that are like, well, actually, ESL have made us a much better offer to sign to that exclusivity league, leaving Turner with a gap to fill. Or equally, it might not be an exclusivity league, but teams might start getting into this murky territory of asking for special dispensation. Remember, this is a 10-week, 2 seasons of 10 weeks with broadcasting and live games to take place across every weekend of that 10-week period. So if you wanted to sort of get into that murky world of saying, hey, but can we play in ESL as well and maybe play in Turner, but we will need the 9th weekend off, will you make special dispensation? Obviously, if Turner starts saying, well, yeah, you can do it, all the other teams are going to say, well, why can't we do it? And so it's going to have to be rigidly enforced. So there's almost like an implied exclusivity if you go into the Turner League. So with all of these things being so up in the air, I don't think we can resoundingly say which teams are going to be involved and which ones aren't. I certainly wouldn't be confident, and I was at that meeting. So I think that's something to be mindful of. And look, it seems that Renegades, I don't think Renegades would embarrass themselves. We've got too much respect for the people involved in Renegades. Obviously, they have absolutely committed. And I think geographically, I think it's very good for the league, presuming they don't make any roster changes. And we have a Australian team represented. I think that would be good for American television, actually. I think it's a good storyline. I think their backgrounds will be good for the ancillary programming and the documentaries they plan to make. So I certainly hope they are involved. But right now, I think putting all your eggs in that particular basket, it kind of feels a bit strange for me.
Plus, it's also just whack to be like, oh, I'm just waiting for this big tournament. No, you aren't. You just trash now, and that's your excuse because you're going to try and hope you fix it by then. There's no one in the universe, by the way, has ever really been waiting for a bigger tournament while playing a smaller one. It's true. You might play a smaller one and just play with the strats you have now and not rework them and not put in extra time because you might not have time. That's true. But at the end of the day, if you lose a smaller tournament, odds are you're just not that good at the moment. So, you know, it depends how they're trying to present it in that sense, I guess.
So, I mean, we need to wait and see what happens with the Eternal League. I mean, regardless, I do wish, Renegades all the best, and I hope they can pull themselves out of this slump because, as I said, I'm a cynical, jaded, veteran esports journalist. It's very rare that stories come along like, working class kids, have all this wonderful opportunity and do well for themselves and laborers turned, competitive players go on to live the dream in Atlanta and whatnot. So I certainly hope it works out for them. But right now,
I'm not sure anyone dreams of living in Atlanta, Rich. I'm a laborer in Australia, mate. You know what? One day I hope of living in the deep south of Atlanta with Matt Skrilla.
Let me tell you,
lots of sick hip hop music.
Yeah, R. Kelly lives there now. So
that's their dream. They just want to. What's that song? They just like, I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. Dream about Turtle League in Atlanta every day. I'm a laborer.
You won't be laughing. You won't be laughing when R. Kelly
kisses
gets
all over
brought out. No, when R. Kelly. You definitely won't be
I won't be laughing then, though.
If he does that. But you watch, maybe he might be. Imagine if he was singing the official theme of the league or something. I mean, as it is. When I was doing the Face It League last weekend, James Bardolph let it slip on air that he'd been talking to DMX.
Wait a second, you do mean Face It League, not just because they're both black? They don't all know each other, Rich. I've told you this before.
No.
I know you're always going up to him. Hey, listen, mate, do you know Immortal Technique? He said, I don't, mate. I think he's from like Peru or something.
If you meet him at one of your gatherings, no, it's not like that, mate, right? But basically, yeah, he did let it slip on air that he was talking about DMX, talking about DMX potentially doing something with Face It. I don't know what it would be, but the one thing is, this is particularly good news because DMX really needs the money right now. He just got out of prison not that long ago, so it could happen. The dream could happen. Me and you could be working an event with DMX there. Did you ever dream that would happen, Duncan?
It's also not another one of my dreams in many ways. But between DMX and R. Kelly, I mean, imagine if R. Kelly did like the theme tune to the Eternal League. It's the remix to the Eternal League.
Anything's possible. Anything's possible. Anyway,
let's come to the booth to the analysis desk.
Let's just draw back from the wonderful world of R. Kelly and let's start talking about the iBUYPOWER Cup that recently happened. Obviously, we've talked about Renegades, and they beat TLG. They had the 16-0 at Luminosity, and then of course lost to CLG again in the rematch. Now, overall, me and Moses both felt it was Luminosity's time to shine. No pun intended. That Luminosity were going to go on and they were going to win this, and that they were easily the best team in show because you had the likes of Complexity there, you had the likes of Conquest there, CLG, Renegades, the Beleaguered Winterfox, and Liquid and Cloud9. I felt Luminosity had the edge on all of them. As it happened, Luminosity were beat in a best of three by Cloud9, who were looking really resurgent at this tournament and went on to win the whole thing. Now, what's interesting about this tournament is there was a lot of chat about whether they'd be carrying on their slump or not, and who was going to step up and who wasn't. As it actually happened, I thought Shroud finally seemed to have a really good sort of tournament, and in particular in that series against Luminosity, he was an absolute beast. So just some thoughts, I guess, first of all, about Luminosity not being able to, once again, convert these best-of-3 wins when they need them, when tournaments are on the line. And, of course, Cloud9's resurgence, because I know, obviously, you're a big Cloud9 fan.
Yeah, the Luminosity thing is weird because I pointed this out at CEVO, that like you look at them as a team and they're not a team that have many best-of-3 wins, because actually most of their tournaments is where it's a really stacked tournament. They come in, they get the one map in the group stage, or they come close to winning a map and you go, wow, what a great performance, but then they don't win a best-of-3, you know. So they won one at CEVO because they beat Titan in the first match there, but that's about it in terms of big European names or whatever. So at this tournament, well, obviously they didn't win any best of threes here either. So the weird thing about Luminosity, this is why analysis can be difficult sometimes. On one hand, they have the best accomplishments of any NA team in the last few months, because at the last 2 majors they made the round of 8. So that's great. And technically, no, they didn't win any best of threes there either, because they won the 2 best of ones. So it's a good accomplishment, but in a way, it's actually more impressive to win best of X series and win a tournament like Cloud9 did now. So it's kind of hard to weigh it up, because on one hand, it's a better accomplishment, but it's actually more impressive, I think, to win the tournament like Cloud9 did. So there is something off a little bit about Luminosity in that sense. Like, it is strange that they can be so good on like a single map, even against really world-class teams. But for example, against, in theory, well, it's not really in theory, is it? Like, obviously, Cloud9 should be a worse team than Fnatic, but Cloud9 actually handled them in that series. They just wrecked the first halves of both maps, and it wasn't even that hard a series. So there's something a bit off with the Luminosity guys. Cloud9 did look a lot better. It had to be said, Team Liquid looked pretty good in the final. I thought that final, both teams could definitely have won that final. That third map was really back and forth.
Yeah, well, let's bring Team Liquid to the conversation. We'll sort of spare some thoughts about Luminosity, because we're going to talk about them in a little bit anyway. Again, but obviously Cloud9 power through. They play Team Liquid, great series, well worth staying up for. And even though, like you say, it was set perfectly, because both teams won their maps in convincing fashion. And then we got on to Cobblestone, where both teams fancy it right now. Both teams have had good results in their history, and of course we had an overtime situation which resulted in a blowout for Cloud9. Interestingly enough, I've been watching Cloud9's games. When they get to overtime, which they seem to have a problem closing out games and closing out leads, and yet when they get to overtime, in the last 3 or 4 instances that I can think of, they generally tend to do very well in overtime situations. But anyway, let's talk about this final and what you made of it.
I mean, yeah, the thing is, the first 2 maps, because they were blowouts, not as great to watch, but obviously it was good in the sense that when one team gets blown out, if they come back and blow the other one out, it sets up the perfect third map. And then the third map was really exciting. Like, it was back and forward the whole way. It has to be said, overall, it looked like Cloud9 had the better T side. Like, they were playing a lot better there. And I thought some of the rounds that TL won to even get it to OT and to have a chance were a bit fluky. I mean, there was the one round where they had to force buy. I think it was on like the 28th round or something. It's where they lost the force buy. And then I think the next round they had to get just Tech 9s. And that was where Hiko just killed 2 people in like a half a second in like what was like a mildly fluky scenario, because obviously he can't 100% aim the Tech 9. So he just got a bit of the luck of the gods on that one. But overall, I think the right team won. Like, when I looked at it, Cloud9's T side looked a lot better on that map. Whereas towards the end of the game, especially in overtime, Team Liquid was like super slow and super passive. Like, when I was watching this game, it actually made me think that I can't tell if it's that CSGO is just a bit different from 1.6 in this sense, or whether Team Liquid and NA just don't notice this. But if you watch the way Team Liquid's T side on Cobble worked for the entire game, basically, if the CTs had ever pushed early to get initial contact and spot someone, if they'd have ever spotted someone and the person was Nitro, they would instantly know this is where they're coming to, this site. And if they'd ever have pushed and spotted someone and saw it was Hiko, they'd know that's the lurker, the fake, and they go to the other site. You could have literally read Team Liquid like a book if you'd ever pushed and just got the info. You wouldn't have to take the fight. If you see Hiko, 100%, 3 or 4 people are at the other site. Like, Team Liquid doesn't even mix it up, The whole point of that sort of a lurker, it's almost like I understand why some players hate the idea of set roles now, the idea that you're going to do that all the time, whereas you should only be doing it, that's like your tendency, Because actually, if I think about it, I don't know if it's that teams just didn't read it, but if I was teams in NA, if they're going to be that predictable, I think you could actually abuse their T side even more, because normally you're supposed to mix that up a bit. Like, yeah, you should have your lurker be in this spot most of the time, but you should have him also go with the main body of the group at some point in time so that they can never quite know. Whereas at the moment, you could actually have read T-Half like a book in that sense.
I mean, I thought it was good to see them bounce back from a really disappointing SEVO, where they were really, really poor. And, you know, that 2-0 series loss to Conquest, who were absolutely woeful here. You know, they lost 16-4 to Cloud9. I even said, I think it might have been on our previous, no, it was to Moses, actually. I said I didn't think Conquest would be pushovers against Cloud9, predicated on what I saw at SEVO. Turned out I was wrong. They got absolutely wrecked on Inferno. And then they lost to Complexity of all teams, which seemed to be unthinkable. Now, Conquest have already had, predicated on that SEVO performance, big organizations sniffing around them and wanting to maybe make them a formal team with a better home. And really terrible for them that they followed it up that way. But, you know, Liquid obviously bounced back after that disappointment against Conquest. And I thought they might have nicked the final against Cloud9 ultimately, especially when I saw it on Cobblestone. I gave Liquid the edge there. But overall, do we feel Liquid are headed in the right direction? Do we think actually we were maybe a bit premature in terms of saying I think they might need to maybe switch a player out? I'm still perplexed by Nitro. I cannot get a read on this guy. 1 minute,
I thought he was quite good in that final, actually, though. He was the guy in the third map where I thought, like, I didn't blame him at all for the way the third map went. He played the way that you probably would play in a win.
Yeah, definitely not. But I mean, you know, throughout the tournament, again, he had his ups and downs, and it was quite telling for me that he was better on the map that they lost, the must-win map, than in maps that they won. And I always find that's a bit strange when your players that you want to perform actually put in the performance, but then something goes wrong with the rest of the team, something malfunctions. Just looking at the statistics here, overall for the entire series in the final, Nitro was at the bottom. And believe it or not, and this is probably the most telling, Adren had the highest number of frags. Not even just the best ratio, the highest number total of frags with 60. So I think, you know, it's hard for me to judge whether Liquid have really turned the corner or whether it's the same old problems. And Nitro and Fugly, for me, remain kind of, I know, like enigmas. I can't really figure them out. It never seems you can back them. And whenever they put in a good performance, you think, okay, they're here, they've arrived, this is it. They're going to go on and do it. Well, they never really seem to build on that promise. They always flatter to deceive.
I mean, the thing with their team is, yeah, at the moment, I think as you can look, if you look ever since Hiko arrived, they definitely did improve in as much as the roles make a lot more sense now. Like every time they do have a good T-side, it is because Alicia's doing really good entry fragging, Nitro follows him up. Like there's a logic to how the team works, and then Hiko has the free role to be the lurker that he wants to be. The problem is, like as you're saying, it just doesn't always work all the time. Like sometimes, like I'm saying, when I think of them at their best, when they're winning T-side rounds, that's when they would almost like rush fairly quickly, actually. In fact, what's funny is the round I referred to before, where they had only the Tech 9s, they had to just rush, and that round worked out. Whereas the ones where they had full guns and they went super slow, it was way less likely they were going to win on those rounds, and no one's just going to walk in by himself and get killed. So I have to say, in that aspect, just with the lineup they have, they could probably be better already. Like maybe that's a coaching issue or the players still have something to figure out there. I do still think that at some point in time they're going to have to change a player, because now it's not like it's been one LAN now. They've had a few LANs now with this same lineup. I mean, off the top of my head, they've had the qualifier, the major, they've had SEVO. So they've had, this is their 5th LAN with this lineup as far as I can tell. So that's a pretty decent body of work. You should be already close to your, like you should be probably 80% of how good you're going to be at least after the 5th LAN. I mean, if you look at like 5th LAN for like Fnatic or Envious, they're like winning events and placing in the final already. So that whole thing of like, give us time. I mean, how much time do you want at this point? You know?
Yeah, I agree. I do agree with that. Thoughts about Cloud9 just finally winning this tournament? I mean, obviously we're going to move on to the RGN Pro Series. Talk a little bit about that. And they certainly struggled in that one. But obviously, a tournament win under the belt. It was decent opposition. It's not like they took any, easy route. They had to beat Luminosity in a best-of-3. They did it 2-0. They had to beat Team Liquid in a best-of-3, including an overtime victory on Cobble. They did it 2-1. So those are, in isolation, impressive results. There's been a lot of speculation about the Cloud9 lineup and where it's going to head, and obviously Swag is standing in for them at the RGN Pro Series. Still a lot of chatter about Get Right possibly being in the frame to cross the Atlantic and go and play for them. What do you think about Cloud9? Are we starting to see the upward climb, Bane-esque, out of the pit that they were in?
To a degree, yeah. I mean, at this tournament, they looked a lot better than all those other tournaments. I have to say, though, one factor that I think comes into play is, like, in that final, especially on that third map, when it was like a close game, back and forwards the whole time, they seemed to win, like, almost every clutch round, it felt like. Except for, like, the one that Hiko won, and there was one where I think there was one other player, I think, like, Fugly or someone won one. Aside from, like, a couple, every single one, no matter which player it was from Cloud9, seemed to always go Cloud9's way. And my read on that, I can't just be like, oh, every player on Cloud9 is an amazing clutch player who's just super good. I got the sense more that it's that other players in NA kind of have like a nerve factor when they play against Cloud9 in like those clutch scenarios. Like for some reason, I think Cloud9 got like a little boost in that sense. Like when people are playing them, somehow they have the psychological edge because normally you don't see all of them winning clutch rounds out. So that helps for sure. Also, Freakazoid was really good on the third map there. He was doing really good work, so that helped the whole machine work. And Skadoodle, by the end of overtime, had got it together, but I thought he was like, he's still a bit spotty, actually, in some ways, it feels like at the moment. So I think Cloud9's improved, yeah. The problem at the moment is, okay, so the last few months since Cloud9 dipped, we've all been trying to figure out who is the best NA team. And so initially we were like, right, maybe it's CLG, maybe they get it by default, while everyone else is figuring shit out. Then Team Liquid got the new lineup, and we were like, oh, maybe they're the new best team, and if they'd been a different group at the major, they'd made it out. Then people were even like, wow, this Conquest team's managed like a pretty decent result. Are they going to be a contender? There was an interview, I can't remember who it was with, from some team today at this tournament where they made some quote like between all the best teams in NA at the moment, it just depends like who has the best day or something like that, or who plays the best. I actually think it's the other way around at the moment. There's no clear best team in NA. They're all having these up and down results. It's the other way around. Whoever you think the best on one day is depending on which of the sort of three candidates shits the bed completely. So now no one's going to talk about CLG being contender because they've fucked up completely in these last two tournaments. Whereas before they were super stable. Team Liquid's had those tournaments that they bombed and they still haven't won a tournament, so it's, yeah, your case there's kind of a bit mixed. You're going on like performance rather than results. Cloud9's won this tournament, but they bombed some of the past tournaments and looked unconvincing. So at the moment, I still don't think any of these teams are like, put it this way, it's not that they've all gotten better and they're all battling each other and all going to be really good. At the moment, none of them look like European level at the moment.
Mm. Well, look, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break here. Not just because our cameras need to be reset again. Absolutely not. But we've also got a Alphadraft video that we want to show you, which tells you all about the wonderful services that you can take advantage of. And it features some familiar faces. We'll see you shortly.
Leg out. Yellow model cheat, yellow bottle sipping, yellow Lamborghini, yellow top missing. Yeah, yeah. Look like a toupee. I get what you get in 10 years, in 2 days. Look at me now. Look at me now. Oh, I'm getting paper. Look at me now. Oh, look at me now. Yeah, look at me now. Oh, look at
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We've had to do a little change again. Skype is a wonderful program, and may the people who make it burn in hell for all of eternity. Now, one thing I do have to say, Duncan, is I can't help but feel that Alphadraft advertisement with Renegades would have perhaps been a bit more potent and powerful and punchy if the 16-0 hadn't happened.
I thought you were going to say if it was me in the commercials. The difference is I'm getting sick Alphadraft Skrilla, and I'm living a sick lifestyle, and I'm not making a fool out of Alphadraft. I'm actually doing top quality work. Whereas, like, if I were, here's the problem, right? I would logically think to myself, is the reason why they've got so much money that they play Alphadraft, but they never pick themselves on it?
Mm. Well, yeah, it's true.
Questions to be asked, you know.
You got to be sensible. Got to be sensible. So anyway, let's talk about RNG.
Also, I don't understand why they made that commercial. Like, what was the message of the commercial? Like, that's just a Tuesday for me. You know, like, was it so unusual about their lifestyle or something? You know,
that's what you were doing last night.
Maybe I've become jaded. You know, I don't know.
It's lonely at the top, mate. You know, I mean,
it's like I said to the owner of Renegades, because at the moment it fits the CSGO team. Here's the thing. When the CSGO team gets down and they're doing badly and they're going out of a LAN before they even get to the playoffs, they come in and they go, oh, listen, we're really sorry. And the owner of Renegades, by the way, is called Chris Badawi. And so they say, like, Chris, you know, we've let you down. You know, I mean, we just don't deserve to represent Renegades. And he goes, guys, this is what I always envisioned. It was even in my name. It was foretold. Just how bad are we?
Wow. How long have you been sat on that one for, dude?
Listen, I craft them. I plant seeds, Rich.
You're like fucking Bob Monkhouse with his fucking books. You know what I mean? You write them all down. I know. Just off camera, you've got them written down. I'm gonna work that one in. But bad are we? This is show.
It's good, right?
And also reference Brian De Palma. Yeah. Sea of Love. Yeah. Anyway, let's get back into talking about RNG. So I'm going to just pick out some points that stood out to me rather than break the tournament down. There's been a lot of people saying the tournament's a little bit of a mess. I think people are really being a bit... they're going overboard, I think, with the whole, oh, this is like the American gaming paradise. Come the fuck on, guys. Like, that was an unprecedented disaster. RGN... sorry, I've been calling it RNG. Sorry, I've been playing Hearthstone too much. RGN is nowhere near that bad. But let's talk about one thing that leapt out to me immediately. I stayed up very late last night. I was watching Enemy play. I watched him on the first day as well against CLG. And this Kusta guy, a lot of people have been raving about him and saying this guy's amazing. He should be in the top team. This guy's going to be a sick AWPer. Like, all he needs is the players around him. And I thought that was all bullshit. You know, how many times have I heard that about an American player? You know, like, so I just didn't really pay it any attention. And every time there was a good performance, it was like, oh, it's online. You know, don't get too carried away. Well, I watched him play in a LAN environment, and he is shitting on people. It's unfucking believable. This guy is playing like those old school American AWPers that we had an abundance of in Counterstrike Source, where it was just literally no fucks given, you know, mobile style, just kind of running towards you and has the reactions to get himself out of trouble and to actually play as an entry fragger, but with the AWP. So I'm hugely impressed by this guy. What are your thoughts about him?
Yeah, it looked good. I mean, especially in that upset win over CLG, like that was legit stuff. And the thing is, like, as you're mentioning now, the guy who's always championed this guy to me is actually Moses. Every time over the last few months, Moses has been talking to me or other pros, and they're like, oh, who should we get and who should we change in our team? He's always like, you got to get this Kusta guy, man. He's so good. But the problem is, because he's not like proven beyond playing like an amateur / semi-pro level, just with the way the NA scene is. I also think, I'm not certain about this, but I think he might be young as well. Yeah, it's always going to be hard to kind of get that status if you're a guy where you just haven't proven it yet in that sense. So I mean, this is obviously a step along the way to doing so. And yeah, he did look good. And at the moment, they do recycle a lot of talent in NA, as you've seen from some of the Elevate lineups, the Neelam, all these sorts of teams. So I think certainly it would make sense to me that he should be moving up the ranks a bit. I don't know if he's ready to just go straight into like a CLG type team, but you'd figure at least these teams like Complexity, Conquest would start looking at someone like him and say, right, we've got to try him out at least.
So let me put it into perspective, right? I watched him play against Luminosity late last night. And they were in a best-of-3 series. Now, we've already talked about Luminosity and how they, you know, labor in these best-of-3s. First map, Mirage, it shows Luminosity doesn't really have that, you know, in their locker, despite choosing it. I wasn't really impressed at all with their Mirage play. It went to overtime, 19-17, the final.
Well, the funny thing is, Mirage was the original home map for that team back when they were Kaboom. And so, but the thing is, often people don't even let them play it. So I'm actually surprised that Enemy was willing to play it. And obviously they were so close. It's just Enemy must think they're really good on it too.
But I mean, since then, obviously they've changed the player, and I would say they've even changed the dynamic. you know, of the team. Fallen's took a very different role to what he was doing before. I'm not sold on it. I'm trying to think. There was another result recently I watched where Luminosity really sort of labored to victory on that as well. And I definitely think it's something that they should revise. Now we get onto that second map. We get on a train, and Luminosity win it 16-3. But here's what's incredible. So Enemy got absolutely pasted on train. You can see that from the scoreline. It was ridiculous. 3 T rounds and then 0 CT rounds. But Kusta had something like 20-odd kills. And he was doing work. I mean, these weren't easy kills to come by. Now, Luminosity, by contrast, were making these ridiculous, like even Steel and Bolts were making 1v3 clutches. And it was like everybody on Enemy, apart from Kusta, was just shitting the bed, like just really letting him down. But Kusta stood out, hugely impressive. I've got the numbers in front of me here. He was the only player on Enemy to have a positive kill-to-death ratio. He got 49 frags overall in the series, which was a 19-17 and a 16-3 win. Now, to put that in perspective, that is joint parity with Fallen, who was the second highest fragger overall for Luminosity, just behind coldzera. That's how good he was performing on an individual basis. And I consider Luminosity a top-tier team. So, I don't know. Maybe it's time for Kusta to really... You know, if there are any scouts out there or anyone's thinking about giving this guy a chance, you know, and he's not that young, he's 19. You know, okay. I wouldn't consider that a kid by any stretch of the imagination. I guess the way that our scene has evolved, it's still arguably young, especially if you've not had a lot of life experience. And I can't speak one way or the other on that in that regard. But I honestly think Kusta could be ready for a big opportunity based on what I've seen in the last couple of days. I've been hugely impressed.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense in that regard because, like I say, a lot of these other teams, you can talk to some of the NA teams. It's not like they're all delusional and think that none of them need roster changes. It's just the first thing they'll say to you is, well, you know, it's easy to say a roster change. Who do I pick up? And the problem is you start trying to list names and either they just make excuses like, oh, that guy's got an attitude problem. That guy's an onliner. This guy, I hate him. You know, whatever the reasons are. Yeah. The difference is for someone like this, as far as I know, there's no reason that they should have anything against someone like this except that they hadn't proven themselves. Well, now he's starting to do that on LAN, and so he's potentially in position to do so.
So we talk a little bit about Cloud9. Now, what makes it interesting here is Sean Gez has taken a break from this tournament. Swag is the stand-in, and Nothing is taking over calling duties. Now, on day one, they burst out the traps, had a very good result against Complexity, a 16-1. And Swag was incredible. 21 kills, 3 deaths. Just ridiculous. I don't think headshot ratio is a particularly good metric to judge anyone's success. But, you know, he was polling 62% of his shots, shots were headshots. So... just a really incredible performance from him. And this is Cobble, you know, not a map that lends itself to major blowouts, unless, of course, you are Renegades. Now, they then go on, and this is where it got interesting. They had a series as a result of that against the other Brazilian team, which was Gamers Academy. Now, Gamers Academy took the first map, Dust 2, against Cloud9 16-14, and it had one of the craziest 1v5. Well, it was like a 2v5 that became basically like a 1v2. But anyway, it was an ace AWP clutch from Henny to give him a 16-14 win. One of the best just individual moments. They had no right to win that round. Overtime looked penciled in. And it was just ridiculous. Did you watch it? Were you watching last night?
I watched some of that game after I saw that clip. I watched some of the video. So, yeah, it was interesting.
It was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, sure, you can argue Cloud9 shit the bed with that. But it was just an amazing performance from him. Really noteworthy. Check the clip out. It was one of those moments where even though it was like fucking 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or something for me, I actually fucking, gave a little fist pump and... hang on, don't say it, Duncan, because I happened to be in bed at the time. But anyway, they did very well. Then you go into Cobblestone, again, we see Cloud9, you know, they beat Team Liquid on this, so you're expecting good things. Goes to overtime, and again, Cloud9 pull a 4-0 in overtime out the bag. So now we're going into cash. This is, you know, a map that's historically been one of Cloud9's favorites, and it actually goes ridiculously one-sided to Cloud9. They get off to a ridiculously good start on CT, 12-3. You're expecting an easy game. Then Games Academy come back. It's an 11-4 half. Cloud9 take it 16-14. A truly great series, no doubt about it. And instrumental at various points, it's got to be said, were Swag, Shroud, and Skadoodle. So we saw two very different Cloud9s. We saw the Cloud9 who can blow you out in a best of one, and we saw the Cloud9 that can grind out a series win. So getting back to the Cloud9 discussion, and in particular the inclusion of Swag, what do you make of it all?
I mean, on one hand, it's not that great that you have 3 maps that are super close with the second best Brazilian team, because obviously they haven't really got the pedigree on that team to think they'd be good. Like, the only player I knew from that team was FNX, who used to be an old MIBR player, but hasn't been like anything stellar in CSGO, certainly. The Hen guy was good in the 1v5, yeah, and he was good overall on that map. Thing is, it's not like Gamers Academy looked like, okay, this result shows they're going to be like legit and they're going to be right up with Luminosity. I kind of thought that was just like a one-off for them. So I do kind of take a little bit away from Cloud9. They weren't able to close it out a bit easier. It's obviously not ideal to not have your in-game leader. Like, the official reason they gave was something like that he's attending a wedding, I think, was the reason as to why Sean Gers isn't there, which, I mean, it's hard to know if that's supposed to be real or not, because I've just been lied to so many. I can't trust men anymore, Richard. They've just lied to me so many times. About,
Especially good-looking men, right?
How many times has your grand died? And why have you got like lipstick on your thing? Oh yeah, well, at the wake, they, you know, one of my aunties just kissed me. Like, okay, we'll have to see about that. So, in terms of the Swag thing, okay, I understand if they want to play the LAN where they'd use him as a stand-in. I just don't really see what the point is, since if he can never play in any majors, I don't really know what the point of using him is. It's almost like an excuse. Like, if you do well at the event, you're like, oh, well, great, cool. You didn't, you know, we were just using our stand-in. Cool, we go back to the old. If you do badly, you go, well, you know, it could be expected. We already had a stand-in. So it's all, you're almost kind of fucking the other teams there. Like, they don't get any credit for beating you, basically. Like for example, if Games Academy had beaten them, we could have just said, well, they didn't have the real team there, you know.
Just in terms of Swag's inclusion, again, as I said, considering the problems he's had, obviously, a lot of teams haven't been able to utilize him. Cloud9 have had to have him in the role of I believe it was an analyst, and then he's just a streamer, and now he's a stand-in. He's not even wearing the Cloud9 tag, despite having the avatar while he's playing. This is how cagey people are playing it, because nobody obviously wants to be associated with match fixers. But to me, he showed that he still has an incredibly high level of competency and could still offer a team a lot. He would be a very good player should anyone want to take that chance on him, and obviously in doing so have to use stand-ins for the majors should they qualify. I don't know if you paid any particular attention to Swag's performance. Does it underline the sort of tragedy of him being currently banned and being in this weird limbo for you?
Yeah, I mean, he's the most obvious player of the ones that were banned, who you wish wasn't banned just for his talent. You know, he's always been very good in CSGO. He's never really had any like terrible slumps or anything. He seems like quite a consistent player. And most important of all, if you're going to be in NA, he's a player that in general doesn't really seem to have a lot of enemies in the scene. So could also be a part of many top teams. And presumably they would all want him if he could play the majors. It's not like there's not going to be enough tournaments. If the circuit was like it was this year, there's tons of tournaments. In fact, most of your tournaments aren't majors. It's just that if you're going to be a team like a Cloud9 who wants to potentially win a major one day, I realize that's like a ridiculous dream right now, but that should be where you're aiming to be when you consider the results from the summer. I don't know that it almost feels like a wasted investment to use Swag if he's never going to be unbanned, if you then don't have him for your main lineup, which you want to be at your best in the major, you know, like ideally you want to peak for it, not be playing your best elsewhere, winning all the money and then being like, oh, we just put a ringer in for the major. So I think that's the dilemma there. And yeah, obviously he's still a sick player. He could be a very good player, but I mean, he seems like he's trapped in an impossible situation at the moment.
Bryce Blum, the eSports attorney, he wrote an article today over on the Daily Dot entitled "The Case of Swag: A Criminal Justice Review of Just Punishment." And just to make for those that maybe haven't heard the name Bryce Blum before, he currently works over.
Sounds like a fucking Cluedo character.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? Professor Blum, yeah. Bryce Blum obviously works at Unicorn now, but he still maintains a full-time practice, and he represents people and organizations in the esports industry. Now, he wrote a sort of summary, and just to give you all the gist, but I do strongly recommend you seek out the article and read it. He basically says that the idea of a one punishment fits all for all of the members of iBUYPOWER, despite their different circumstances, ages, and levels of complicity, is not appropriate at all, and that he would be willing to try and, if there was anything they could do, challenge on Swag's behalf to try and get him unbanned. Now, just to place this in a broader context, I think obviously there is a lot of sympathy towards Braxton, because he's the youngest person who was involved in the throw. He was 17 years old. And it's interesting, I think, as well, that while Skadoodle, for example, did play in the throw, and as far as we know, going into that game, based on all the evidence that's been compiled, was aware of the throw. The only reason that he didn't receive a ban or a penalty was because he didn't receive any skins. Now, this might have been on the basis that he said, no, I don't want the skins. This could also, as some people have suggested, have been on the basis that he was the last person to get the skins, and as a result, didn't get them in time by the time my investigation, Valve's investigation, led to the punitive measure by Valve. So a lot of people have said that they feel, Pierce was kind of co-opted into it. AZK, before he disappeared from the scene, said that Braxton was absolutely right in this assertion. Meanwhile, other parties within the team, Dazed in particular, have said this is you can't force somebody to do something they don't want to do, and they need to know right from wrong. So far from wanting to open up old wounds, and I don't know if it'll resolve anything or not at this point, where do you particularly stand on this issue?
I mean, I do agree just with the premise of that guy's article. I haven't read it, but the notion that you have to look at like whose idea was it initially, and then what was the coercion factor, and all that. You have to weigh these things up, I think, and as a result, there probably should be different sentences for each person. In terms of breaking down the whole Swag thing, I have to say, I actually still find it weird that Skadoodle wasn't given any punishment at all. That's crazy to me, because here's the problem. He's had, as far as I know, he admitted he knew it was a throw. And I mean, presumably he didn't go ham and try and 1v9 the whole game and win in spite of them, so he definitely did not reach out in any way to try and get them done over for it, not even privately, anonymously, in any context. So in a way, he is surely complicit. So the idea he gets no punishment and the rest get the maximum possible punishment seems totally out of whack. I'm sorry. I don't agree entirely with all the punishments. I think he should have gotten something, certainly. But the idea that Skadoodle gets nothing, I think, is ridiculous. And I don't care if people like Skadoodle's personality or whatever. That's irrelevant to the case. In fact, I think that's the whole crux of why this case is so crap when people discuss it in public. Because what really happens is, it's not even about the other issues. People really just go, well, I hate Steele, therefore he obviously was the ultimate criminal. I like Swag. He's a nice guy who was tricked. There's a funny point that Dazed made in my Reflections interview with him, which I think is actually a really pertinent point to make, but it's one I hadn't thought of, which is I essentially put that topic to Dazed to say, you do know one of the reasons why people really hate you isn't just that you threw and that you got banned, it's that they feel as though you fucked over people like Swag and Skadoodle. Obviously didn't actually fuck Skadoodle over, but potentially because they think you're the ringleader along with Steele, and that those guys just did what you said. And he actually made a really good point, which people haven't thought of, which is he said something along the lines of like, basically, Swag is not the sort of person you can influence directly, as in when you tell him to do something or when you even ask him why he's done something, sometimes he just doesn't answer. He just won't give you a reason. And think of this. Remember what happened right after the throw is that right after the throw, they cut Dazed and Steel from the team. And the ringleader of the cut was Swag. And what he did was he just got Skadoodle and he got AZK and he just said, Swag did this, said to them, right, let's cut Dazed and Steel. Instead, we'll get Desi and Nitra, who were friends of his, and we'll have a better team, because it's true, there were problems in terms of arguing in the team, and everyone had said the team was going to break up anyway. But think of that logically. So that means not only does Swag act of his own accord separate of Dazed and Steel, actually in some ways goes behind their backs, has them removed, influences other people in his team. But thirdly, if Dazed and Steel are some sort of mesmerists who can control his mind, how are they unknowingly getting cut from their own team? So that's not some sort of clear-cut issue, okay? There's obviously a lot of grey area here, but the point I'm trying to emphasize is that I don't think it's as easy as, well, I like Dazed, I like Swag, he seems like an innocent man, whereas Dazed seems like an asshole, therefore he's obviously the ultimate criminal. I think it's a really difficult case to kind of go on in that sense. In fact, I'd like to hear kind of like, I know this wouldn't change anything, but I'd like to hear like individual testimony of each member in terms of who they think was complicit, what they think the ringleader was. I'd love to know the all answers if they were all separate, you know, there was no like external pressure, because I don't know that we'll ever get to the bottom of it, unfortunately.
I mean, you know, look, I've made my views on it quite well known. I did write an open letter to Valve about it, which they read, and predicated on that open letter, they were kind enough to grant me a audience, if you will, at Cluj, where we discussed it. And I said this to Steele when we talked at SIVO, and it's left me with a very curious, you know, like a conflict of feeling, and that is, I believe it was morally and ethically right as a journalist to investigate that throw, to follow it to its logical conclusion, and to see that the truth was put into the public domain. Because I think nothing undercuts the legitimacy of a sport than when you cannot believe that the results you are seeing are legitimate.
So you're saying that D-Man casting eSports is actually undercutting the legitimacy of the sport?
It's certainly one of the many problems we're left with. But you know, if you can't put faith in what you're seeing as being genuine, and the whole sport becomes a sham, an illusion, then nothing will harm the fabric of a sport more than that. So I believe that. But as I said to Josh when we were talking at SIVO, had I known my work was going to fuck over 4 people for life, inarguably for life, with no chance of an appeal, nothing they could do, I don't know if I would have published a piece.
It's just the way you kept saying "for life." It started reminding me of that NWO shit. For life. Sorry, Steele. You fuck. I life. Like new world order. You're banned for life. For life.
So it's really tough, because even to sort of publicly admit that, right? The people who regularly, still to this day, send me messages of hate about how I ruined the NA scene single-handedly, rather than aiming it at the players that fixed the game. They'll probably swarm to me a little bit more for saying that. The people who've supported and championed me for doing what was right will probably say, you know, well, actually, fuck you. What a terrible you know, betrayal of your values. But it's a really hard one. So it's a fucking hard one.
Yeah, but that's the problem with that, right, Richard? Is unfortunately, like, that's because you know the outcome of it. Like, realistically, I think it's on you. You have to, if you get the information, do this story anyway, because ultimately you're not the one who's fucked those people directly. At the end of the day, Valve are the ones being unreasonable. So that's like if you were some sort of police guy in Iran. Okay, your job as a policeman is still to uphold the law. It's not your fault if it then goes to some judge who says, oh, the law isn't even that we're just going to cut the hand off, we're just going to cut this guy's head off. Like, at that point, even though, yeah, indirectly you led to that, it's still someone else making the corrupt decision at the end. So, like, I get what you're saying there. If you knew now, you obviously would not do it, but I think it doesn't shift the blame from Valve for being like so unreasonable on the matter. I think.
But I think what makes it worse as well is that it came at a time when everybody was talking about match fixing, and I still believe, and I've seen very compelling evidence that isn't compelling enough to publish and be ethical as a journalist, but it's compelling enough for me to make up my mind that European teams, including some reputable teams, were engaged in throws. And you know, I feel, and they'll know who they are. They got to skate completely consequence free, reputations intact, and yet the North American players were crucified. I mean, they are the example now. Again, I don't want to get into the ins and outs of the conversation I had with Valve, because one of the provisos of having a discussion with them was I wouldn't publish anything or say anything publicly. But they did say, and I'm sure Valve won't mind me repeating this, that they feel the one thing players should be terrified of doing, well, two things that players should be terrified of doing, and that is getting caught cheating and getting caught fixing a match. But the problem was there were no rules in place at the time. Yes, everybody should implicitly understand that it's wrong, that it's bad, that it's damaging for the sport. But I only had the evidence for them. I only had compelling enough evidence for them. And that was all, of course, predicated on the efforts of D-Born's girlfriend. Again, without that, it's probably speculation, and my reputation's dirt. So again, it's a real tough pill to swallow for me, knowing that I've played a part in ruining the career of a young man who's incredibly talented. And yes, he definitely has to shoulder some of the responsibility. But again, I play it over in my mind, and I'm not sure justice is served with a life ban with no appeal.
I mean, there is also, let's be real, there's also some sort of responsibility to be going on that little sket who apparently had no problem with any of this shit. Then the second he got in relationship troubles with D-Born, was like, now I am morally outraged at this. Have all the information, including private conversations. So in short, D-Born should have Supermaned that whore.
Yeah, well, and not only that, I think at that point, if there was a way out of it, D-Born could have fallen on his sword somewhat, or rather been more careful with where he put his sword. But anyway, the overall point is that, you know, I think it's a very difficult situation. I hope that we get to a point, whether it's another year from now or so, where we can maybe revise this and do something about it. You know, by that point, it will be 2 years. 2 years is an incredibly long time in esports, and you know, I don't necessarily feel justice has been done. Especially, I do believe, had they come out and publicly admitted it and not eluded and evaded punishment, they probably would have only been banned from CEVO. I mean, that's the greater tragedy as well. That I think
that's also what's weird, is the timing of it's so fucked. Like, if Valve had instantly investigated the thing like a day after, well, then they wouldn't even have, essentially, they wouldn't have had time to fuck themselves over even more by denying it.
Yeah, exactly right. And just on a point, because obviously I've got one eye on the Twitch chat. When I say that there was European teams that were involved in throw, please don't take my words and use it for speculation about players and go on and make wild accusations about it. Don't. It's done now. It's all in the past. It's all resolved. We're never going to get to the bottom of it. And the last thing we need is any fucking moral hysteria or people twisting what I'm saying when I'm talking very specifically about the NA case and cases that were brought to my attention at the time to accuse hardworking pros erroneously. Definitely don't do that. Anyway, back to RGN and a few more talking points, and then I'll let you go, Duncan, and rest your weary head. So we almost come full circle in terms of tournament talking points, because we get into the final four of the RGN Pro Series. And interestingly enough, it's the teams that perhaps we would have expected. Luminosity are there with that enemy.
Oh, remember there's a lower bracket as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. There is a lower bracket. But sorry, the four in the upper bracket, the four favorites, it's going to be Renegades, Cloud9, and Liquid and Luminosity going head-to-head in that upper bracket there. So, again, does this suggest that maybe Renegades, you know, might be turning the corner? Because, I mean, ultimately, out of the teams that are in the lower bracket, I think you've got, you know, Enemy, who if Kusta can keep powering them to victories, might be the surprise. I think Winter Fox are already out. I think Games Academy relegated them. So I think, you know, you've got the best of the rest in lower bracket, but ultimately in a series, I can't see them beating any of these teams here. So, but back to the Renegades question: if they can get a good run here, maybe even make it to the final, who knows, even win the whole event? Would we start giving them plaudits? Will we start seeing them in more Alphadraft adverts?
It would be some vindication, because to do so, they'd very likely have to win 2 best-of-3s over some good teams. So that'd be legit. The way the tournament's structured, when people are complaining about the fact that like the schedule's totally off, supposedly the lower bracket is all best-of-3. So you have to play like 1 billion best-of-3s or something if you're in the lower bracket already. So as a result, I suspect if the tournament goes super late, that basically whoever wins the upper bracket probably just wins the tournament. So whoever gets there so knackered after playing all those matches, it's going to be hard to have the confidence to go for it. So I think that helps teams like Renegades, Luminosity, and Cloud9. I think it gives them a boost, because Cloud9 obviously don't have their in-game leader, so they're kind of still like freewheeling it a bit and hoping they just outfrag people and just win outright. So I think at the moment Cloud9 is probably still the favorite. Renegades, yeah, obviously if they could even just beat Cloud9, that would be a big result for them. It would help put them back on the track. They can sort of say, hey, it was just a best-of-1. We lost to CLG yesterday, which would be fine. Obviously, if they got to play Luminosity again, that'd be really juicy to see what would happen then. Presumably, they wouldn't get 16-0'd. But at the moment, I'm still feeling like it's going to be Cloud9 and TL that decide this tournament.
And just dipping into the game, obviously, this won't mean anything if you're watching it as a VOD. But for those watching us live, that series is underway now, the Renegades Cloud9 game. Renegades are 11-10 up on Inferno with Yam top fragging for them, putting in a decent performance with 19 kills and 12 deaths so far. So pay close attention to that one. Now let's do a general news roundup, and then I will let you get to your bed, Duncan, where you belong. Right. So I guess the big story, I almost want to talk about some of the smaller ones, but probably not, since his time is limited. The big story is, of course, everything that's going on around with IEM San Jose. Now, that's going to take place this weekend, and obviously we know the tragic events that took place in France with the ISIS attacks. This has meant that Envious, due to an increased security and travel safety concerns while the police conduct their investigation, means that unfortunately Envious are going to have to withdraw, and they of course have been replaced by CLG. So obviously tragic circumstances. No one could have foresaw that. Is missing this tournament anything that's likely to perhaps break up some of that major winning momentum, Duncan? Could this have an ongoing impact on the team, or is this just, you know, actually nothing to worry about beyond the obvious, you know, security issues?
I don't think this will matter for Envious. In fact, if anything, it's not Envious that I was worried about. I think it's just sad for the tournament, because now whoever wins the tournament, everyone will say, yeah, but Envious wasn't there. So that just sucks. I mean, they were the best performing team at the last major. So I wanted to see some of the other teams test themselves against Envious. So I think it sucks more in that respect. And they have won so many events recently and done so well that it's not like you can think, oh, but maybe they would have done badly there. It seems very unlikely they would have done. Like, I think they would have almost certainly made the final. So I just feel kind of sad in terms of the legitimacy of whoever wins the tournament isn't as great as it would have been if they'd been there.
Yeah, and I think that's something worth mentioning, actually. We've got G2, CLG, Cloud9, TSM, Na'Vi, Luminosity, Liquid, and Virtus.Pro. And I would actually say, based on recent results, some people I'm sure will agree, TSM and Virtus.Pro have got to be the favorites to win now in the absence of Envious. I know Na'Vi fans might not like that, but Na'Vi seem to be in
they're a wreck right now.
Yeah, they seem to be in a bad place. We'll talk about that briefly. But I guess talking about those teams that are attending, me and you are going to be leaning for the TSM win, right?
Especially when you look at their bracket. I mean, their bracket has Cloud9, Luminosity, Na'Vi. Like in theory, either some of the weakest teams or some of the weak teams that have got the most problems right now. So it feels like they have to make the final at a minimum. Like I don't expect any choking of like what happened at the major. And when you look at the total lineup of the event, with the fact that VP don't have Snacks, their best player, and the fact that G2, yes, they've upgraded a player, but it's a brand new player. I actually think TSM, this is like their event to lose. Like they should be winning this event right now.
Well,
I think they will as well.
Yeah, so here's where it gets interesting. Obviously, a lot of people are talking about the absence of Snacks. Yes, it is a huge blow to lose a player of his talent. No doubt about it. But I think they brought in Mishu as a stand-in. And I think it was the, I think it's the RGN Pro Series he's playing in right. No, is it? I'm trying to think. I just watched him.
I think he's playing with CSGO Lounge, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I am right. Sorry, it's been so many games lately, and I'm trying to watch as many games as I can fit in. I've definitely watched more CS than D-Man has. He's playing with CSGO Lounge. Now, Mishu has been putting in some very good performances. Obviously, CSGO Lounge haven't progressed in RGN, as we just talked about. But he was performing at a very high level. And in particular, he seems to be doing really well as, as a point man. Seems to be getting a lot of opening kills on the site. So the question, for you would be, obviously they're going to miss Snacks, but is bringing Mishu into the lineup going to give them enough to still potentially win this tournament?
I mean, the big X factor for me is that when I look at the overall lineup of the tournament, like they are playing Team Liquid first, so I think they can. That's certainly a winnable series. In fact, I'd probably slightly edge them to win at the moment, bearing in mind TL's problems closing games out. So I think they can win that. In terms of the other one, I mean, G2 is still changing a player, even if it's for a really good player, can mess up the chemistry. So it being G2 even might be possible. I don't think they're going to win the event against like the original TSM lineup, though. With that said, though, there is a little bit of light in the end of the tunnel. Like, it's true, you've lost Snacks, who's one of the best players in the world. But actually, from memory, I actually think when they had Mishu standing at the first Gfinity this year, Spring Masters 1, the one where they finished third, I think it was actually Snacks that he replaced there as well. So at least they have some history using him for that exact role. And Mishu actually played well in that tournament. So because of the depleted sort of like form of the field in some sense, I think it's going to give them a chance. But I think they would have to have a really inspired run to actually win the tournament, though.
Yeah. So the sort of final talking point on which to end is then strange times in Na'Vi, right? Like really fucking weird. They go from being in the final of a major, they lose to Envious. No shame in that. And since then, there has been trouble in paradise. And it's ridiculous. Guardian is playing on a level that would even make me inclined to say he's the best player in the world right now. Not just the best AWP, but the best player. He is ridiculous. I saw him drop 40 frags in regulation time against Fnatic. And it just a ridiculous performance from him. And Na'Vi still lost. Then they played Fnatic again. They lost a game 16-3, I believe it was. And at 15-3, with the round just right at the start, on Dust 2, Guardian GG'd up early and just said GG. And I think JW put something like, hey, it's still, we're still playing here. And Guardian was like, no. So they are in a mess right now. They are losing games they shouldn't win, shouldn't lose, and they're failing to be competitive in games that ordinarily you would have them winning. Now, first question is, what the fuck is wrong with Na'Vi? And the second question is our ongoing narrative that we've had on By the Numbers, that this constant talk about new Simple, or indeed new Gimple, as you have dubbed him. Are we getting closer to that reality?
You'd have to figure so, especially because it would seem kind of a step back if you're going to replace anyone right now on Na'Vi with like an ex-Hellraisers player or something, because they themselves aren't in great place in their careers. So you have to figure he's the only option. So yes, I agree. Bring out the Gimple, as I said last week.
I mean, do you really think that's the problem? So here's what I want you to commit to then.
All right.
I want you to commit to who goes out.
I mean, I've always said all along, I always thought it should be Flamey in as much as he's too inconsistent. At the moment, though, the big problem is Edwards kind of dropped off a bit. And then beyond that, there's the whole issue that I've kind of mentioned before. Like, the only real reason I can see to keep Zeus is that you'd want him to be the disciplinarian if Simple comes in. But actually, if Zeus isn't going to be the in-game leader, it does remove a lot of his value. So there's actually it's now gotten to the point where there's a bunch of candidates you could remove. Before, to me, there wasn't many candidates. Therefore, that's why I picked Flamey, because it's like it's a star for star swap and someone who might be better. Well, I think is better player. So at the moment, I think there's a lot of options. That's why, to me, it's worth a shot, because pick one of those players, remove him, put Simple in. It's not like it can go worse than it is right now. I mean, yeah, you had that miracle run at the major, but let's be real. You had that miracle run thanks to TSM choking and not playing you. I don't think you would have been in the final otherwise, even with an amazing performance. So I hope they don't put too much stock in the major, because they probably, by the looks of it, it's just time to change. If you think of how many bad results they've had aside from the major.
I mean, the other question, of course, is, I guess if Simple was coming in, you'd probably need Zeus to be the one who went out, because they're the two you can imagine having the most friction. Now, I don't know necessarily, you know, how difficult Simple is to play with these days. Certainly, Hellraisers, he came back in and acted as a stand-in for them, which seems to fly contrary to some of the things they said about him. But I don't know. I mean, is there a risk that, as good as he is, the Simple to Na'Vi move can never happen predicated on his personality?
For sure. The thing is, though, I've noticed, here's a trend you'll see in CSGO. Teams always say, now, we'd never make a change with this guy, we love him too much, or we'd never get that guy, you know, he's shown problems, or actually, but they always say that while it's going well. Once you get desperate enough, eventually you just make the moves that, with what's available, you make the moves that you have to make eventually. I don't think you can hold out. The only team that I've seen who've held out forever is NIP. And then we know there's other things going on in their organization. In general, people just do end up making sort of the moves that make the most sense. The players do go to those teams. And for this one, it seems like the obvious one, because not only is it a player you can bring in, yeah, he has the problems, but he has such a massive upside if it works, that it could not only like fix things, it could maybe, if everything goes perfectly, make you a really good team. So I think it's the obvious move. I mean, it's true. The weird thing is, on one hand, you'd want to remove Zeus because you wouldn't want there to be the clash. On the other hand, maybe there should be a clash. Like, maybe Simple should come in, and next time he starts chatting shit, Zeus is just up in his face like, you ever get your shit pushed?
Going full sniper. But anyway, a lot of people, again, in the chat are talking about how he said to a player, "Oh, you play like bitch. Thanks for the game." But what people aren't even saying in that is that guy was, like, you know, trolling particularly hard. He wasn't just having a bad game. He was antagonizing Simple and you know, being a bit of an asshole. So that's the kind of thing I would say. So this whole toxicity thing, please don't bring that to CSGO. Stick that up your ass. Anyway, now Zeus is obviously potentially having a very bad time of it, Duncan, because we saw a tweet earlier today that, you know, Zeus is it was Zeus taking a selfie with his, what you can assume is his girlfriend, or perhaps a lady friend, in the back on the bed. Well, somebody has updated that picture now to suggest, much like you did with Makalela's ex, you have stole Zeus's woman now as well. So we'll bring that up on screen. We've got Sam to do that. So
someone claimed it was actually Zeus who uploaded it. Like, he put on his Instagram, they said. If so, he's a baller. Like, I like that. I appreciate it. I
definitely like it. But
that's the grade of ladies I'm getting with the Alphadraft Skrilla, guys.
I just love the fucking pajamas.
Can
I just say I love the pajamas he's wearing, though?
Sick, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a straight baller thing to do. So anyway, I think that's a fitting point to end.
By the way, that just shows what a baller Zeus is as well. He's just like, you sit on bed, I take picture.
Yeah.
Cover eye, you do not look sad.
Yeah, exactly. What I like about it is, as well, he's like, you shall not look in the mirror. Like, she's just got a hair over her face and stuff. So
yeah, it's control right there. I like that. Full control, as Pasha would say.
Yeah, full control, mate. So anyway, that's a good point to end the show on. A nice bit of full control. Obviously, I will do my sort of requisites plug for Alphadraft and say that you guys should sign up there. Go to alphadraft.com and show your appreciation for them letting me and Duncan do the show that we want to do and never interfere. You know, we think it's pretty good. We know you guys like it, so show your appreciation. Duncan, with that said, I will let you have the final word and then we'll wrap up. Yeah,
Alphadraft, thanks for all the cash. Much like that video from Renegades, that's what my life is like, just every day. I mean, I don't feel the need to make a video about it. It's just every day for me because I play on Alphadraft and get 6 Skrilla. So if you want to do so there. Goodbye, world.
Okay, great place to end it. See you next week. Peace.